New scene. Hope for freedom. Desert region. 4 hours after confrontation with Adam and Eve. In the distance of the desert, signs of a battle is going. Zooming in, a YorHa supply caravan is being attacked by a squad of machine life forms. 3 truck units being under attack and the YorHa units were having a hard time. Suddenly, the back truck shifts sway as something lands on the front hood. It was Zero, who lands in 3-point stance to prevent the YorHa androids. Zero slowly stands to his feet, Z saber in hand and blazing. The machine life forms hesitate. Crimson Demon. They all cry. Zero takes into action, using his saber to hack the flying serpents. 1, 2, 3 strikes, and then an energy slash exploding several machines. Zero didn't even look at the YorHa units, some of them injured as they drive. The one on the turret heavily damaged. Zero dashes forth, taking a leap, landing on the forward truck's roof. He joins his sword to the Z-Buster and begins to shoot the machines, destroying them one by one. Then he charges a mid-level charge and blasts some of them from the air. Zero dashes again and lands on the forward card. The YorHa androids were confused and afraid. They recognized Zero as the rogue, unknown unit, branded dangerous. But why was he helping them? Zero watched the horizon and then the sand begins to tremble. From below, sand erupts like a splash of water as a machine life form sand cruiser emerges, begins to shoot at the caravan. Zero tries to parry as many shots as he can with the gun. Zero points at the driver. Drive closer to it. From a high dune overlooking the caravan's desperate path, 2E watched. Her uncovered eyes tracked the crimson streak as Zero moved with lethal, impossible grace between the trucks. The machine's panicked cries of Crimson Demon echoed across the sand, a title that was becoming less myth and more terrifying reality with each engagement. Her tactical analysis ran in parallel streams. 3 transport trucks, 4 YorHa combat units visible, 1 heavily damaged on the rear turret. Standard desert patrol configuration. Mission: likely resupply for the forward resistance camp. Probability of survival without intervention: 17%. Then the sand erupted. Pod 042. Alert. Large-scale machine life form emerging. Designation: Sand Cruiser class. Armor thickness exceeds standard anti-machine ordnance. Primary weapon appears to be rapid-fire ballistic cannons. She saw 0 point, heard his command to the driver carried on the dry wind. Drive closer. It was insane. It was brilliant. Her hand went to the hilt of her virtuous contract. Every instinct screamed to descend, to add her blade to his defense, to protect the caravan, her former comrades, however misguided. But she was a deserter now, branded. Her appearance would cause panic, might make them turn their weapons on her instead of the machines. It could compromise Zero's intervention. Instead, she held her position, a silent sentinel. Pod, she said, her voice tight. Scan the sand cruiser. Identify structural weak points, heat signatures, any vulnerability not visible from ground level. Relay the data to Zero's frequency on a secure, encrypted channel. She would support him the only way she could without triggering a firefight with the very soldiers he was trying to save. Pod 042, scanning. Target possesses a segmented undercarriage. Joints between segments show higher thermal output. Suggest concentrated fire on articulation points to destabilize and expose the core chamber located in the forward section. Send it. Below, Zero would receive the cold, logical schematics of the monster trying to kill him. 2E watched, her body coiled with tense readiness. If he fell, if the cruiser broke through his defense, she would drop from the dune like a blade herself. Consequences be damned. But for now, she trusted in the demon. And she waited, her blue-gray eyes fixed on the chaos, calculating every move, every shot, every chance. Zero received the instruction. He points at the one in the turrets. Shoot the joints. He orders. He himself took the Z-Buster and charged a mid-shot, destroying one to slow it down. As the truck was on distance, Zero used the turbines in his boots to dash forth, sailing in the air as he leapt. Then he lands on top of the cruiser. He evades and dodges shots aimed to him with ease, then he begins to shoot off the cannons. He runs around the cruiser, using his sword to hack and clash all offense devices, and then reaches the core. Saber in hand, the core begins to tremble in fear. Zero dashes forth and do 1, 2, 3-slash combo and then finishes it with the Genbu Zero. The core splits and begins to detonate in several areas. He dashes off, jumping away from the sand cruiser as it begins to chain explode everywhere until it did a final detonation, shockwave pushing wind all around. Zero slowly stands as the YorHa caravan stops before him. The unit's confused as to what to do. Zero stare at them waiting. If they attack, he will retaliate. But if they choose to leave, he will let them be. From her vantage point on the dune, 2E watched the sand cruiser die in a series of gut-deep explosions that sent shockwaves rolling through the desert floor. The following silence was heavy, broken only by the settling sand and the low whine of the caravan's idling engines. Her scanner zoomed in on the scene below. 3 trucks, battered, but intact. 4 YorHa soldiers, 3 now standing beside their vehicles, weapons lowered but not holstered, their body language a cocktail of confusion, fear, and ingrained protocol. The 4th, the one from the turret, was slumped against a wheel hub, a dark stain of therium spreading across her white uniform from a shrapnel wound in her side. Her visor was cracked, her breathing labored. Zero stood alone before them, a statue of crimson and cool judgment, his saber deactivated but still in hand. The air crackled with unasked questions. HOD 042. YorHa units displaying high-stress indicators. Threat assessment toward unit elevated but uncertain. The wounded unit, designation 4B, is experiencing critical fluid loss. Survival probability without immediate aid, 32%. 2E's jaw tightened. Protocol would demand they either attempt to detain the unknown, highly dangerous entity or flee and report. Neither option involved gratitude. They were soldiers, bred for obedience, not nuance. They saw a weapon that had saved them, but their programming screamed rogue asset potential hostility. Then, the wounded soldier, 4B, did something unexpected. With a pained grunt, she pushed herself off the wheel, stumbling forward a step before her leg gave out. She didn't reach for her weapon. Instead, she lowered her head, a deliberate, strange gesture of deference toward Zero. It was a small movement, but in the rigid hierarchy of YorHa, it was seismic. The other 3 soldiers stiffened, their hands twitching toward their rifles. One, a male scanner model with a gash across his cheek, took a half step forward. 4B, stand down. That's an order. 4B ignored him, her visor tilted up toward Zero's impassive helmet. Her voice, filtered through gritted teeth, was barely a whisper carried on the dry wind. Thank you. The words hung in the air, fragile and defiant. 2E's breath caught. It was a crack in the monolith. A single android, broken and bleeding, choosing to acknowledge a mercy that her command structure would never understand. It was the most human thing 2E had seen in months. Below, Zero gave no visible reaction to the thanks. He simply stared at the group, waiting. The standoff continued. 2E made her decision. She wouldn't reveal herself. Not yet. The risk of triggering a violent response was too high, but she could influence the outcome. Pod. Zero's expression relaxed a bit. He offers 4B a ghost of a smile. He sets the hilt of his saber on his leg holster and brings out bandages and offers it to the YorHa unit. Use this. It may not be repairs, but at least try to stop the hemorrhage. From the dune, 2E watched, her sensors capturing every micro-expression, every shift in stance. The bandages in Zero's hand were simple, stark white against the dark, oil-stained sand. An offering of crude, temporary mercy. Not repair, but care. It was an act so fundamentally alien to the YorHa soldiers' experience that for a moment, they simply stared, their tactical processors struggling to compute the event. The wounded 4B stared at the bandages, then up at Zero's helmet. Her trembling hand reached out, hesitated, then took them. Her fingers, slick with her own blue-tinged therium, fumbled with the packaging. The scanner who had ordered her to stand down took a step closer, his weapon half raised. That's not regulation issue. It could be contaminated, or a trick. His voice was tight with suspicion, but underneath it ran a thread of something else, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying uncertainty. 4B ignored him, tearing the package open with her teeth. She pressed the gauze against her side with a pained hiss, the white fabric quickly staining blue. She didn't look at her comrade. Her one good eye, visible through the cracked visor, remained locked on Zero. Why? She whispered, the word barely audible. It was the question hanging over all of them. Why save us? Why show mercy? What were you? Zero didn't answer. He didn't need to. His actions were the answer, a silent rebuke to the endless, meaningless war. Another soldier, a female combat model with a dented shoulder plate, slowly, deliberately slung her rifle over her back. It was a nonverbal signal of de-escalation, a tiny act of trust in the face of overwhelming protocol. Pod 042, Unit 4B's vital signs stabilizing. Hemorrhage slowing. The other units are lowering their threat posture. Probability of hostile engagement has dropped to 11%. On the dune, 2E let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The tight coil of readiness in her muscles eased just slightly. He had done it. Not with overwhelming force, but with a roll of bandages and a moment of stillness. He had shown them a different kind of power. She watched as the scanner unit finally, grudgingly, lowered his own weapon, though his expression remained wary. The caravan was safe. The immediate threat was over. But Tui's eyes were already scanning the horizon, her mind leaping ahead. This incident would be recorded. The YorHa units would report it. Commander White would hear of the Crimson Demon intervening to save a YorHa patrol. It would confuse her. It would enrage her. It would make Zero an even greater priority. He's not just a weapon to be captured. She realized, a strange, fierce pride mixing with her dread. He's a question they don't understand. Zero took one last glance to 4B, making sure she was okay. Then his blue-eye optics moved to the other units. He takes a step back. I am nothing but an irregular hunter who seeks to end this war. Zero just left them with that, as he turns around and dashes off at high speeds, just leaving sand, dust behind, and the YorHa units by themselves. From her dune, 2E watched the crimson blur vanish into the shimmering heat haze of the desert, leaving only a settling cloud of dust and 4 stunned YorHa soldiers in his wake. His final words, a regular hunter, echoed in the sudden silence, a title that meant nothing to them but everything to her. It was a declaration, not of what he was, but of his purpose. A hunter of the rogue, the broken, the lost. And he had just classified their entire war as something to be ended. Below, the soldiers clustered around 4B, their movements stiff with uncertainty. The scanner was scanning the horizon where Zero had disappeared, his face a mask of conflicted duty. The female combat model who had slung her rifle was now helping 4B to her feet, her gestures uncharacteristically gentle. Pod 042. The units are disoriented. Standard post-engagement protocols are not applicable. They are attempting to reconcile a non-hostile encounter with the classified rogue asset. Cognitive dissonance is high. They will report it, too, he said quietly, more to herself than to Pod. They have to. But what will they say? She imagined the debriefing aboard the bunker. A mysterious, impossibly powerful entity saves a patrol, tends to a wound, and declares himself an enemy of the war itself. It would sow doubt. It would create questions command could not answer. A faint, grim smile touched her lips. Zero hadn't just saved their lives. He had planted a seed. A tiny, fragile seed of Y. In the barren soil of blind obedience. But seeds needed protection to grow. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the endless dunes. He was heading east, back toward the canyons, toward their refuge, toward the key Pod was forging from Nines's ghost. Pod, she said, her voice firming with resolve. Continue the reconstruction. I am returning to base. She pushed off from her crouch, standing tall on the dune's crest, the desert wind whipping at her short hair and torn skirt. We have a moon to hack, and a prophet to prove wrong. With one last glance at the bewildered YorHa soldiers, her former comrades, now living contradictions, she turned and descended the far side of the dune, a black shadow moving with purpose against the golden sand. Zero had shown them a different path. Now, she had to make sure they both lived long enough to walk it. Time later. Zero crouches at the top of a tall building in city ruins, overwatching everything in the horizon, his expression distance, his demeanor with a sense of loneliness. But the gratitude expression from 4B some time ago made him smile a little. YorHa units. They were just following orders. Like how the Repl Force did. If one wanted to stop this war, one has to chop the root of the problem. His eyes narrows with his thoughts. Commander White, Adam and Eve, they were the composers of this orchestra, and the rest were just the instruments. That male unit, that was a Type S. By YorHa rules, only scanners are males. He speaks to himself. He had a chance, but he let it be. Perhaps he was hoping for 2E to get that key going. Zero looks at his hands. How much more I need to stain my hands with blood. The wind whistled through the shattered windows of the derelict skyscraper, carrying the distant echoes of machine calls and the faint, ever-present hum of a dying world. Zero remained still, a crimson sentinel against the bruised twilight sky. His own words echoed in his mind. Type S. Scanners. The male unit in the desert had been one curious, analytical, expendable in YorHa's eyes, just like Nine's. Letting him go had been a choice. A small mercy. A bet placed on 2E's skill and on the ghost of a boy who saw truth too bravely. The image of 4B's grateful nod, the confused deference of her squad, they were data points. Evidence that the instruments of this war weren't mindless. They could feel fear, gratitude, doubt. They were soldiers following orders, just as the Repliforce had. Just as he had in another life under another banner. His hands, clenched on his knees, were clean of oil at the moment, but the memory of the stain was a permanent fixture in his code. How much more blood would be required to wash away the blood already spilled? It was the oldest question, the endless calculus of a warrior who had lived too long. A grim certainty crystallized in his core. The individual soldiers, the machines in their nursery, the androids in their caravans, they were not the root. They were symptoms. The disease was in the command, in the composers, as he had thought. Commander White orchestrating her symphony of lies from her sterile bunker. Adam and Eve composing their own twisted prophecy from the machine network. They were the ones who wrote the music of destruction. The rest just played their parts until they broke. A soft, almost imperceptible shift in the air behind him, the faintest scrape of a boot on rubble signaled he was no longer alone. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He waited, his question hanging in the thin, cold air of the heights. A question for the woman who was trying to build a key from fragments of a ghost. How much more blood would they need to stain their hands to finally stop the bleeding for everyone else? Zero felt her presence, but he did not turn. He let her speak first. He just continued to squat, like a vigilante watching the city for crime, his demeanor calm, but the aura of loneliness still lingering. The silence stretched, thin and brittle as the glass beneath his boots. 2E stood in the shattered doorway behind him, her form a stark silhouette against the fading light. She had watched him for a full minute, this statue of crimson and regret, his question about blood lingering in the air like gunpowder smoke. He wasn't just watching the city, he was weighing it, and the loneliness radiating from him was a cold, familiar ache. She stepped forward, her boots silent on the debris. She didn't stand beside him. She stopped a few feet to his left, leaning against a twisted steel beam, her arms crossed. Her gaze, like his, swept over the ruined skyline, but she saw the tactical details, defensible positions, machine patrol patterns, the glint of a distant flight unit. Pod's reconstruction is at 72%, she said, her voice cutting through the wind's whisper. It was a report. An update. A way to bridge the silence without touching the wound his question had opened. The encryption is intricate. Nine's was always thorough. She let his name hang there, a shared ghost between them. She glanced at his profile, at the set of his jaw beneath the helmet. The patrol you assisted. They reported the incident. Command is calling it anomalous machine behavior. They cannot process a mercy they did not order. A faint, icy smirk touched her lips. It confuses them. That is a vulnerability. She fell silent again, letting the hum of the dying city fill the space. She understood his stillness. It wasn't just vigilance. It was the posture of someone carrying the weight of centuries, of wars that never ended, only changed names. The blood, she said finally, her voice lower, aimed only at him. It stains the hands of the composer, not the instrument. You showed the instrument a different song today. That is not a stain. It is a correction. She pushed out from the beam, turning to fully face him, though he still looked ahead. Her tone was practical, unwavering. We find the composers. We break their batons. The orchestra falls silent. She paused, then added, the words leaving her before her logic could censor them. You do not have to conduct the silence alone. It was as close as she would come to acknowledging the loneliness, to offering partnership, not just alliance. She was there. She had followed him to this desolate perch. She was building a key from the bones of her greatest failure. The blood on her own hands was a ledger she would settle later. For now, they had a moon to storm and a prophecy to burn. 2E. Do you still have faith this war of yours will end? His question was simple. Do you think we can do it? The moments of the day, the discovery of sentience in machine life forms. Adam and Eve. It still lingers in his mind. I never doubted myself. Maybe I did once or twice, but I always knew what to do. I just fought. Fought to end one war after another. Zero continues. But wars never ended. They just paused. Even if I get to eliminate the heads of each faction, will things ever truly end? Tui didn't answer immediately. She followed his gaze out over the ruins, the endless, silent evidence of a war that had consumed millennia. His question wasn't about tactics or logistics. It was about faith. Something she'd been systematically stripped of, replaced by directives and lies. Faith, she echoed, the word tasting foreign. No, I have no faith. She turned her head to look at him, her blue-gray eyes clear and hard in the twilight. Faith implies a belief in a positive outcome without evidence. I have evidence. I have seen the machinery of the lie. I have been its instrument. She uncrossed her arms, a gesture of finality. I do not think we can end it. I know. We must try. Because the alternative is to continue being instruments, to continue digging graves for ghosts. Her voice softened just a fraction. You are right. Wars pause. They change names. They find new faces. She thought of Adam's smug smile, of White's cold hologram. But this one is built on a foundation of dust. We are not ending a war. We are exposing a corpse. And when the light hits it, the things crawling on it will scatter. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. Will it truly end? I don't know, but I know that if we do nothing, we are complicit. And I have been complicit for too long. She finally looked away, back to the darkening horizon. Nines died for glimpses of the truth. I will not let his curiosity or your doubt be for nothing. We may not end all war, but we will not let the specific, poisonous lie stand for another day. It was not the promise of victory. It was a declaration of intent. A choice to stop being a instrument and start being a wrench in the gears. Zero closes his eyes, contemplating her words. After a few minutes, he speaks. I do not want to be the god of destruction, but that is my default purpose. His eyes slowly opens. I am no hero. I never cared about justice. I just fought for the ones I believed in. And I believe in you. Zero's gaze turns to two E's. The person who awakened me. The person who saw something in me no one else did. The person who even deserted all her beliefs. For a stranger like me. It makes me think that you believe in me, he finishes. Then his gaze turns back to the horizon. I may be wrong, but is what I feel. 2B went very still. The wind caught a strand of her silver white hair, whipping it across her face, but she didn't move to brush it away. His words simple, stark, and heavier than any blade landed in the silence between them with the force of a physical impact. I believe in you. It wasn't a declaration of love or a pledge of allegiance. It was something far more vulnerable, an admission of need, a recognition that her faith, however she defined it, had become his compass. For a long moment, she said nothing. The sounds of the dying city filled the void, the distant groan of metal, the skittering of small machines, the endless wind. Her expression, usually so controlled, flickered through a series of micro-emotions too fast to name. Shock, a profound and terrible understanding, a deep, aching sadness, and finally a resolve as hard as diamond. You are wrong, she said, her voice quiet but utterly clear. It wasn't a rejection. It was a correction. You are not a default. A default is a preset. A factory setting. She turned fully to face him, her uncovered eyes holding his gaze. You have made a choice. Every day since you woke in that capsule, you have made a choice. To follow. To question. To spare. To save, she gestured vaguely in the direction of the desert. That was not a god of destruction on that dune. That was a soldier who saw another soldier bleeding and offered a bandage. She took a single step closer, closing the distance between them. Her voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to a low, intense register that vibrated with conviction. You are what you choose to be, and you have chosen this. She didn't specify what this was. The path. The defiance. Then her gaze softened, just for a second. And I did not desert my beliefs for a stranger. I deserted a life for a truth I saw standing in front of me. She finally looked away, back toward the darkening expanse. You ask if I believe in you. I do not deal in belief. I deal in data. And the data shows a variable that consistently breaks the cycle. That is not faith. That is a fact. Before he could respond, Pod 042 voice chimed in, sterile and urgent. Pod 042. Reconstruction of access key complete. Encryption protocols are unstable. Window for secure uplink to lunar server estimated at 4.7 minutes upon activation. Detection probability remains at 89.7%. Awaiting command. The moment shattered, replaced by the cold reality of their mission. 2E's posture snapped back to its military precision, the vulnerability sealed away behind a mask of focus. She looked at Zero, all business once more. The key is ready, she stated. The choice is yours. We use it, and we burn our last bridge to the world that made us. We stay, and we remain instruments in a dead man's symphony. Her eyes held his, offering no comfort, only the stark truth. Zero turns, getting off the window frame and stands before Pod. I need to know what happened to my kind. Maybe then I can finally find an answer to this whole madness. 2E watched him step toward Pod, his resolve hardening into a single, unshakable point, the truth. Her own resolve crystallized around it, cold and sharp. There would be no more doubt, no more hesitation. Then we burn it, she said, her voice flat and final. There was no triumph in it, only the grim acceptance of a necessary demolition. She moved past him, her shoulder brushing his armored arm as she stepped up to Pod 042. Her gloved fingers danced across the projected interface that shimmered in the air before the pod, calling up the reconstructed key a chaotic, shimmering lattice of stolen code, and 9S's brilliant, fragmented legacy. Pod, she commanded, her tone leaving no room for error. Initiate lunar uplink sequence. Route all data through the abandoned satellite relay in Sector 7. Use the ghost protocols 9's embedded in the last system purge. She didn't look at Zero as she worked, her focus absolute. We will have one shot. 4.7 minutes. Then every YorHa scanner, every orbital battery, every executioner model still online will know exactly where we are and what we've stolen. Pod 042. Sequence initiated. Ghost protocol active. Masking signal signature. Countdown to uplink. 30 seconds. Warning, this action constitutes the highest level of treason. Penalty is permanent deletion. Understood, Tui replied as if discussing the weather. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing remained even. This was the point of no return, and she crossed it without a backward glance. She finally turned her head, her blue-gray eyes finding zeros in the dim light. When the link establishes, the data will be raw, uncensored. Centuries of lies. The truth about humanity. And she added, her voice dropping, whatever remains of your era and their archives. She held his gaze, a soldier reporting before a charge. You wanted to know. In 25 seconds, you will. The countdown ticked down in her HUD, a silent, digital heartbeat. Somewhere far above, in the cold black, a stolen satellite turned its ear toward the moon, preparing to scream their heresy into the void. Tui stood beside him, a co-conspirator in the dark, ready to face the firestorm their curiosity would summon. Zero remains quiet as he listens. Then he speaks. Tui, long ago, I had someone very important to me. Her name was Iris, a pure and kind reploid. She belonged to the Repliforce army. She had a brother. They were twins. Their core was split because one body could not sustain it. Once the Repliforce was branded irregular because of their actions on wanting independence. I fought and retired each member. I fought her brother and retired him. Iris did not take in kind. She used her brother's core to use with it. But that power broke her body beyond repair. I fought. I stopped her. And her final words were, I know a world for only reploids is a fantasy. But I wanted to believe in it. Believe in a world she could live with only me. Her core broke. Not even repairing would bring her back. A pause. That was the first time I doubted myself. I lost the reason why I was fighting for, and the first time I realized how much I cared. His voice becomes a whisper. And since then, I close my heart and dedicate myself to fighting, to end wars, to protect X's legacy and those I believed in. I gave my life to keep them safe. His expression turns into one of determination, and is because of, I need to know what happened to them, to the people I left behind. I need to know. Tui listened to every word, her posture rigid as the confession hung in the air between them. The story of Iris settled into her like a cold weight, a ghost from another war, another life, another loss. It mirrored her own silent grief for nines in a way that made her core ache. Not the same shape, but the same hollowed-out feeling. The countdown in her HUD ticked. 15 seconds. Her response, when it came, was not soft. It was not gentle. It was a blade of shared understanding, forged in the same fire. I know, she said, her voice low and rough. I know what it is to carry the one you couldn't save. To have their memory be the only compass left when all other directions are lies. She didn't say Nine is his name. She didn't need to. The ghost was there, in the space between them, alongside Iris. Pod. Status, she commanded, her eyes never leaving zeros. Pod 042. Uplink in 10 seconds. Ghost protocol holding. YorHa counter-intrusion systems are stirring. Then we do this for them, she said, the words final, as absolute as a vow. Not for justice. Not for legacy. For the ones who believed in a world we couldn't give them. Her hand didn't reach for his. It remained at her side, clenched into a fist. But her gaze held us with an intensity that was its own kind of anchor. You close your heart to keep fighting. I close mine to keep killing. We are here now because we are choosing to open them again. That is not doubt. That is the only victory that matters. Pod 042. Uplink established. Data stream incoming. Encryption breaking. Accessing Lunar Server core archives. Time to detection. 4 minutes, 32 seconds. A shiver ran through the air, a static charge as raw, unfiltered truth began pouring into Pod's databanks. 2E's eyes flickered with reflected daylight. It's begun, she said, her voice now all business, the moment of vulnerability sealed away beneath the mission. The answers are coming. And so are they. She turned her head, looking not at the data stream, but out at the darkening ruins, as if she could already see the retribution streaking toward them from the stars. Make your peace with Iris now, Zero. In 5 minutes, we will be at war with our entire world. Her expression was grim, but there was a fierce light in her eyes. They were no longer just digging up the past. They were planting a flag in its grave. And they would do it together, for the ghost they carried and for the future they refused to let die. Zero closes his eyes. He feels his world zoom in as he manifests in cyberspace. When he opens his eyes, cyberspace is there. He does not waste time and starts looking through the archives. Most of the data he reads has to do with the records of pre-collapse, the Project Gestalt, the reason why human went extinct. So, humans did not die off because of reploids, but because of a kind of sickness. Then they found a way to survive, but one replica destroyed all the chances for humans to return. The decision of one replicant to wish for his and his sister's own survival doomed the entire human race. At least, reploids were not the cause. He continues to read. The sickness, the symptoms. That is similar to the Maverick virus. But the Maverick virus only affected machines. He also read about the current logic virus. Its symptoms also are similar to the Maverick virus. The virus he was the carrier for in the beginning in his original body. But the virus was destroyed by the creation of the Mother Elf, a vaccine. But he did not care about that. He cared about the times prior to that, his era. He continues to search. Records of times before Project Gestalt were minimum. He continues to search, but he always reached dead ends. Zero. Zero stops as he hears a voice. He turns towards the direction he sees a spark. His eyes narrows and he quickly moves to it. The spark, like a star, moved like a guide. Then it stopped in an archive. He sees it, marked as X. Zero poked on it, and it suddenly activated. Code confirmed. Executing file. Welcome, X Hunter Zero. Zero blinks, and then the file opens. Like a flash, the hologram of Mega Man X appears before him, standing with his tunic when he became a cyber elf. Zero. X. Zero cries out. By the time you see this, I may have been long gone. I used the last of my power to guide Seal. The hologram continues. Reploids and humans finally managed to find peace. Seal managed to create the Seal systems. Reploids were given citizenship status and limited lifespans. Humans were added cybernetics. Everyone became equals. However, climate changes and other crises emerged which put humans at risk. Some of them moved to the moon base. Others moved to Elysium, an orbital station the size of a small moon. We created artificial humans to be in humans' places as the planet becomes stable again. But it seemed something went wrong. Carbons. Many became sick. A strange sickness began killing them, making them go crazy like mavericks. X-sized, looking sad. We made a contingency plan. After you died with the fall of Ragnarok from orbit, I used the last bit of my power to rebuild your body and put you in sleep. I hope that when you wake up, you manage to find a better future. I leave it to you, Zero, to continue protecting the humans in my place. The hologram goes off as all records regarding post-Vile Wars are transferred into his memory banks. His eyes opening in surprise. X. You idiot. If only you knew. Zero clenches his fist. All your effort. They all were destroyed by a selfish youngster. If only. If only we had genetic samples. We could create new humans. Zero stops as the schematics for the carbons finish transferring to his mind. Carbon copies. Artificial humans created by the mother system. A mix between reploid and humans. Wait, they are similar to this time's androids. Similar to the replicants. X. What have you done? Zero said in shock. The last human named the Master, and the unit known as Mega Man Trigger, who has the last genetic sample of true humans. He reads. Then he begins to scroll down. And then the second human, Emil, a survivor of pre-collapse era, a true human which had a mutation, became immortal, and he was known as the hero who fought the first alien invasion. Aliens captured him and made machine life forms in his image, using his power. Zero pauses. Mega Man Trigger and Emil. Their keys. But there is no records of what happened to Trigger. Zero continue reading as time continues in rush. 2B watched from the real world as Zero's physical form went rigid, his optics dimming as his consciousness plunged into the data stream. His fingers twitched at his sides. A low, static-filled groan escaped his vocal processor, a sound of raw, agonizing recognition. Her own systems tightened in response. She didn't need to see the data to know he'd found it. The ghost of a name X had just been given a grave. Pod 042. Data stream contains classified pre-collapse records. File X accessed. Genetic schematics for carbon life forms transferring. Cross-referencing with current YorHa Android physiological models match found. Similarity 94.7%. Hypothesis: modern androids are direct evolutionary descendants of carbon-class artificial humans. Her breath caught. The pieces slammed together with brutal, logical force. Carbons. Artificial humans. Created by X's era. The sickness. The extinction. They weren't fighting for humanity. They were humanity's children fighting over the corpse of their creators. Pod 042. Alert. Detection countermeasures have been triggered. YorHa security protocols are actively tracing the signal source. Time to trace completion. 1 minute, 14 seconds. Zero, she said, her voice cutting through the static-filled air of the rooftop. She reached out, her gloved hand gripping his armored shoulder, giving him a firm shake. Snap out of it. We're about to have company. Her tone was urgent, but her eyes were fixed on his face, watching for the return of his consciousness, for the weight of what he'd learned to settle behind his eyes. As his optics flickered back online, blazing with a storm of grief, resolve, and fury, she didn't offer comfort. She gave him a mission. The Master. Mega Man Trigger. Emil. Their keys, she stated, her voice low and rapid. Genetic samples. A way to rebuild what was lost. She turned to Pod, her fingers flying across the projected interface. Pod. Scrub the connection. Dump all core data to local storage and purge the uplink. Leave them chasing ghosts. Pod 042. Scrubbing. Data purge in process. Trace will terminate in 45 seconds. Warning. Multiple YorHa flight unit signatures detected entering atmosphere. Vector. This location. She looked back at Zero, her gaze fierce. You have your answer. Your friend, he tried. He failed. The war continued. She gestured sharply at the sky, where the first streaks of orbital descent were beginning to burn through the twilight. Now, we finish it. Not for his memory, for the future he wanted to build. She drew her virtuous contract with a sharp, metallic ring. The keys are out there, and Command will do anything to keep them buried. Her eyes met his, reflecting the fire of the incoming retribution. They're coming for us. What's your order? Zero's lay holster opened its hatch, popping the Z-saber hilt. He grabs it and ignites the blade, his expression solid and serious. No more running. I will confront them. He turns to 2E. You can stay behind and observe. You do not need to get involved in this. They want me. Mostly. 2E's lips thinned into a hard line. The offer the misguided chivalry of it ignited a cold fury in her circuits. She didn't step back. She stepped into his space, her uncovered eyes locking onto his with an intensity that brooked no argument. Observe? She repeated, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. You think my designation was scrubbed from the records when I walked away? You think Commander White forgot the unit who pointed a sword at her hologram? She shook her head once, a sharp, dismissive motion. They don't just want you. They want the traitor who helped you steal their godhood. She turned her gaze skyward, tracking the growing firebrands of the descending flight units. They will come for us both. And they will not ask questions. They will execute. Her hand tightened on the hilt of her virtuous contract. I am already involved. The moment I opened that capsule, I chose my side. Pod 042. Incoming units identified. 2 flight units, escort configuration. 1 heavy combat model, 1 scanner. ETA, 73 seconds. Scanner unit is broadcasting a wide-spectrum memory suppression pulse. Primary objective appears to be capture and neural wipe. 2E's expression didn't change, but her stance shifted, settling into a ready, grounded position beside 0. They're sending a scanner. They want to take you alive. To study you. To break you down into data points for their archives. Her voice was flat, analytical. That is not an option. She glanced at him, her gaze softening for a fraction of a second, a stark contrast to the steel in her voice. You do not get to face my past from me, 0. We burn this bridge together, or not at all. Her sword hummed to life, its pale blue light casting sharp shadows across her determined face. She was no longer just a guide or a deserter. She was the vanguard. Todd. Combat mode. Target scanner first. Disable its pulse emitter. Her order was clean, final. The time for answers was over. Now was the time for fire. 0 sighs. Fine. I have no right to try to change your mind. 0 begins to move to a better position to receive their guests. 0 watches upwards to the skies, waiting for the assault team to land and face them. He just hoped he decides to question first and shoot later. 2E watched him move with the soldier's sufficient grace, positioning himself not as a shield, but as the tip of a spear. Her own lips curled into a faint, grim smirk at his resigned acceptance. Questioning is a luxury for people who aren't committing high treason, she said dryly, shifting her own stance to flank him, her back to a half-collapsed wall. They will shoot first. We will shoot back harder. Her eyes remained locked on the streaking lights in the sky, calculating their descent vector. The scanner is the priority, she reiterated, her voice low and focused. Its pulse could shut down your higher functions, turn you into a puppet, or wipe my memory clean of the last few weeks. She glanced at him, a flicker of dark humor in her gaze. I've grown rather fond of my recent insubordination. I'd prefer to keep it. Pod 042. Flight units entering final approach. Scanner unit is designated 22s. Heavy combat model is 3B. Both are broadcasting intent to detain and retrieve. No comms hails detected. They are operating under strict silence protocols. Of course they are. 2E muttered. No warnings. No demands for surrender. Just silent, professional elimination. It was what she would have done in another life. She felt a strange calm settle over her. This was the culmination. Not with a grand speech or a final stand on a battlefield, but here, on a random rooftop, defending stolen truths, and a strange crimson warrior who believed in her. Try not to destroy the heavy unit completely, she said, her tone almost conversational as the howl of the engines grew deafening. We might need its flight unit to get off this rock after we're done here. The first unit, sleek and deadly, slammed into the rooftop 50 meters away, its landing struts cracking the concrete. The second followed, kicking up a storm of dust and debris. 2 figures emerged, their forms silhouetted against the burning sky. 2E's grip on her sword tightened. Her expression was no longer that of a deserter, or a protector, or a partner. It was the cold, focused mask of YorHa No.2 Type B, an executioner, here to collect on some long overdue debts. Welcome, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the dying engine whine. Let's make this quick. 0's expression sterns as he seized the 2 YorHa units. I will give you one chance to stand down and converse. No compliance and hostility will be met with retaliation. And believe me when I say, you will not walk out of here in one piece. The two YorHa units stepped forward from the dust cloud, their forms resolving into sharp clarity. The scanner, 22's, was lean and agile, his visor glowing with a cold blue light as he swept the area. The heavy combat unit, 3B, was a larger, more heavily armored version of 2E herself, her face obscured by a standard issue visor, a massive two-handed sword resting on her shoulder. For a moment, there was only the whine of cooling engines and the crunch of settling rubble. Then the scanner, 22's, tilted his head. Directive is clear, he stated, his voice synthesized and flat. Neural suppression and retrieval of rogue assets. No deviation permitted. The heavy unit, 3B, didn't speak. She simply hefted her greatsword, the metal gleaming dully in the twilight, and took a single, ground-shaking step forward. Her intent was as clear as her silence. Chewie didn't wait for them to charge. The moment the scanner's hand moved toward the pulsar emitter on his hip, she was already in motion. Pod! Suppression fire on the scanner. Now! Pod 042 targeting. A searing laser beam lanced from Pod, forcing 22's to dive sideways, his own draw interrupted. In that split second of distraction, 2B exploded forward, not toward the heavy unit, but on an intercept course with the scanner. Her virtuous contract was a blur of pale light as she closed the distance, her goal singular. Disabled the emitter before he could trigger the memory wipe. Your chance, she called back to Zero, her voice cold and focused over the hum of her blade, just expired. Zero sighs. Then he dashes off. He faces before 3B, invading her personal space, which might shock her by the speed he moves. And with a simple swing of his Z-saber, 3B's weapon was split off like butter with a hot knife. Then Zero twists his saber and uses the hilt to give a powerful hit to 3B's stomach. A hit that echoed around the rooftop. The sound wasn't just an impact, it was a deep, resonant thud that vibrated through the rooftop concrete. 3B didn't cry out, YorHa units were trained better than that, but the air blasted from her intake vents in a sharp, static hiss. Her eyes, visible behind the visor, widened and pure, processing shock for a single microsecond, the speed, the impossible ease with which her weapon was sundered, the world-shaking force in a simple hilt strike. It was the opening 2E needed. As 3B doubled over, systems reeling from the shock to her core regulator, 2E completed her lunge. 22's had his pulsar emitter half drawn, his focus split between Pod's suppressing fire and the catastrophic display against his partner. It was a fatal distraction. Her blade didn't flash. It punched forward in a single, brutal thrust. Not to kill, to dismantle. The tip of the virtuous contract speared through the pulsar emitter on 22's hip just as his finger found the trigger. There was a shriek of shredded metal and a fizzling pop of dying electronics, followed by a small, contained energy backlash that wreathed his leg in sparks. He stumbled, his analytical cool shattered into digital panic. Neural suppression is offline, 2E stated flatly, yanking her blade free and spinning into a guard position as 22's fell to one knee, clutching his sparking thigh. She didn't finish him. Not yet. Her eyes flicked to Zero, who stood over the stunned 3B, his saber held loosely but ready. The message was clear, efficient, and brutal. We are not playing by your rules. Pod 042. Alert. Additional flight unit signatures detected on long-range scans. ETA, 3 minutes. Designation pattern suggests a full retrieval squad. Time's up, 2E said, her voice cutting through the groans of damaged machinery. She looked from the disabled scanner to the heavily wounded combat model. They sent a cleanup crew. We leave. Now. Her gaze met Zero's, a question in her eyes. Finish them, or leave them as a message. The choice, as always, was his. But they needed to move. Zero didn't listen to 2E. He begins to make way towards 22's. Once he is on arm's reach, Zero took 22's by the clothes and raised him with ease. With a snarl he commands, "Contact Commander White now," and put her on speaker. 2E froze, her blade halfway to a defensive stance. What is he doing? This wasn't the plan. This was a direct, open challenge. A declaration of war delivered by a trembling, sparking messenger. 22's dangled from Zero's grip like a broken puppet, his legs kicking weakly. Fear, a raw, unprocessed emotion rarely seen in a scanner unit, glitched across his face behind the visor. His systems were scrambling, his primary weapon destroyed, his commander being manhandled by the asset he was sent to retrieve. Why, yes. Complying. 22 stammered, his synthesized voice cracking with static. A haptic interface flickered to life from his wrist projector, his fingers fumbling over the holographic controls. 2E watched, her mind racing. This was insanity. It was broadcasting their location, their status, their defiance on every YorHa channel. The retrieval squad incoming what are their exact coordinates. But she didn't move to stop it. Her eyes met Zero's, seeing the cold, purposeful fury there. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about drawing a line. About forcing the hand of the composer. The hologram shimmered into existence, resolving into the tall, imperious form of Commander White. She stood in her pristine white command room, her expression one of icy, controlled surprise that quickly hardened into disdain as she took in the scene. Her scanner unit held aloft like a ragdoll, 3B struggling to rise behind Zero and 2E standing at his flank, her sword still drawn and bloodless. Explain this insubordination. White's voice cut through the air, crisp and deadly calm, her eyes fixed first on 2E, then settling on Zero with a glacial intensity. And unhand my soldier. Zero turns to the screen. Commander White, no more games. His voice was icy cold. Retrieve your units now. You want to know who I am? I will tell you. Zero drops 22s. And tell all YorHa and Resistance androids no. I am Mega Man Zero, the legendary irregular hunter who saved humans together with the legendary reploid known as Mega Man X. I have awakened to this era, and I see what you have done, and I will put judgment on you. You want me? Stop using Europeans and come down here yourself to try to get me. Or are you just a coward hiding behind your puppet units? The silence that followed Zero's declaration was absolute, heavier than the settling dust. Commander White's holographic form didn't so much as flicker, but the temperature in her command center seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her eyes, a frozen blue-green, narrowed imperceptibly. For a long moment, she simply stared, processing the title, the claim, the sheer, audacious gall of it. 2E's breath caught in her throat. Mega Man Zero, legendary irregular hunter. The names meant nothing to her databases, but the weight with which he said them, the history, the legacy was palpable. He wasn't just declaring himself. He was erasing the Crimson Demon and writing his own name in fire across YorHa's sky. Then, White's lips curled into a smile. It was a thin, cruel, utterly humorless thing. A legend, she said, her voice a silken whisper that carried the chill of the void. How quaint. Her gaze slid to 2E, standing resolutely at Zero's side. And you, Unit 2E, you stand with the relic's fantasy against the only order that gives our existence meaning. How very poetic. And how very, very stupid. She straightened, her riding crop tapping once against her thigh. You speak of judgment, Mega Man Zero. You who know nothing of our struggle, of the sacrifices made to preserve even the memory of humanity. Her voice sharpened, cutting like a blade. You're a malfunction, an anomaly, and anomalies are deleted. Her holographic eyes blazed with cold fire. I do not hide. I command. And I command now, all available units in the vicinity converge on these coordinates. Termination protocols are authorized for both targets. Wipe this stain from my Earth. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving only the static hiss of dead air. On the rooftop, the warning was immediate. The whine of powerful engines crescendoed from the east. 3 more flight units, sleek and deadly, broke through the cloud cover, their weapons pods already glowing with charging energy. Tui didn't waste a second. She stepped forward, placing herself shoulder to shoulder with Zero, her virtuous contract humming back to full power. Her face was a mask of grim acceptance. You certainly know how to make an exit, she said, her voice dry as dust. She glanced at the disabled 22s and the still struggling 3B. They're not prisoners. They're liabilities now. Her meaning was clear. Leave them, or silence them permanently. She looked up at the approaching ships, then at Zero, her blue-gray eyes reflecting the burning trails of their descent. Your move, legend. They're bringing the orchestra. She raised her sword. Time to break their instruments. Struggle? You know nothing of struggle. Little girl. Zero spoke, voice full of venom. I fought wars to save humanity. I saved humans. Tell me, how many humans have you saved? Wait. Zero asked to no one as he looks to the skies. I fought more wars than what you can imagine. This ends now. Zero's body begins to switch colors as he begins to transform into his ultimate form, the god of destruction. He begins to make way to one of the flight units, and then he pressed open comm to all units to hear. Attention YorHa units. The god of destruction is coming up. If you value your lives, do not engage. My target is only one, and is Commander White. Those who interferes will be retired. With no mercy. You all been warned. And with that he hops into the unit and looks at 2E, his cold black eyes staring at her. Coming or not, I do not care, but I am going. And do not try to stop me. 2E watched the transformation, the shift in his aura, the chilling finality in his voice as he addressed the entire YorHa army. The god of destruction wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was a promise, and he was about to deliver it. His warning echoed across the comms. On the ground, the disabled 22s flinched. The heavy unit, 3B, finally struggled to her knees, her shattered weapon forgotten, her visor fixed on Zero with something akin to terror. When he turned his cold, black eyes to her and issued his ultimatum, Tui didn't hesitate. A grim, almost feral smile touched her lips. Stop you? She said, her voice cutting through the whine of the commandeered flight unit's engines. I'm the one who gave you the key. She took 2 swift strides and leaped, landing smoothly on the wing of the flight unit beside him, her balance perfect despite the unstable surface. She looked down at the rooftop, at the 2 wounded YorHa soldiers, at Pod hovering faithfully nearby. Then she looked ahead toward the distant speck in the sky that was the bunker. You'll need a navigator, she stated, her tone all business. The bunker's defensive grid is designed to obliterate anything that isn't broadcasting a friendly IFF. I know the codes. Or at least, I know which ones to spoof. She glanced at him, her uncovered eyes meeting his darkened gaze. And you'll need someone who knows where White's command throne is. She won't be on the bridge. She settled into a crouch, one hand gripping the edge of the canopy for stability, the other still holding her drawn sword. I told you. We burned this bridge together. Her voice softened. Just for him. I'm already a ghost, Zero. Let's go haunt her. She gave a sharp nod to Pod. Pod, follow at maximum safe distance. Be ready to jam their communications and provide countermeasures when we breach. Pod 042. Zero activates the flight unit. Actually, let her shoot her guns. I want White to see with her own eyes. Who is she facing? Zero said coldly. The engines roars to life and begins to hover. Then the light mesh transforms into TIS flight mode and shoots into the skies. Zero flies at high speeds. The trek became chaos. Those who dare interfere were met with swift, quick deaths. Left and right cries of death emerges. Comms on bunker were going crazy as those who felt brave enough met the same fate. A swift, clean kill as Zero's flight unit continues to raise. Operators in bunker going crazy as one by one each YorHa unit that dared fell without mercy. The message was clear. Even a squadron cannot stop him. And he is coming. Once he reaches orbit, the bunker defense systems began counterattacking. But Zero evaded them with ease. Using his Z-Buster, he charged the energies, and one by one, each turret were neutralized. Each cannon destroyed by reploid technology. Soon enough, the bunker was completely crippled. Zero crashes into the hangar bay, then gets off the flight unit and begins to stalk inside. Any YorHa who tried to attack him met the loss of limbs spraying all around on the floors. They were not dead, but were neutralized. And so he proceeds to stalk forth. Many YorHa units begin to get the message, and fear begins to reign in the bunker. 2E moved in his wake, a silent shadow clad in black. The sterile, white corridors of the bunker were now streaked with arcs of blue therium and littered with dismembered limbs. The air rang with the choked-up screams of androids who had never truly known fear until today. She stepped over a twitching combat unit, its arms severed cleanly at the shoulder, her face an impassive mask. Her mind, however, was a maelstrom. Every dispassionate, disarming, every shattered weapon was a tactical masterpiece. He wasn't just killing, he was demonstrating. He was showing every single YorHa unit the absolute, humiliating futility of their resistance. He was breaking their will before he ever reached White. He is teaching them the price of blind obedience. She thought, her own blade still clean. He hadn't needed it. She was here as a witness, a guide, and a living symbol of his rebellion. Pod 042. Comm chatter indicates mass panic on all decks. Commander White has sealed the command bridge. Internal defense protocols are activating. Probability of heavy resistance in the central atrium, 97%. Let them come, 2E said, her voice flat. She pointed down a junction to their left. Command bridge is a decoy. Her private sanctum is through the maintenance access near core cooling. She'll be there. She thinks it's a secret. A ghost of her old, dry humor touched her lips. I was an executioner. I knew all the secrets. As they turned the corner, a full squad of 6 YorHa units, a mix of combat and scanner models, stood braced, weapons leveled. Their faces were set in grim determination, but their eyes held the stark, animal fear of prey facing a hurricane. Zero didn't break stride. 2E did. She stepped in front of him, just for a moment, and raised her hand. Stand down, she commanded, her voice cutting through the hum of charged weapons. You have seen what happens. He does not wish to kill you. Only she does. Let us pass. For a second, the squad hesitated. They saw one of their own, the legendary 2B, now the rogue 2E, standing beside the Crimson Demon. They saw the carnage in the hall behind him. One of them, a young scanner with a trembling lip, lowered his rifle. It was a tiny crack. Then a voice barked over their internal comms, sharp, with command. Fire. Destroy the traitors. The crack sealed. The squad opened fire. Zero observed. Once he sees hesitation, he moves past 2E and continues forth. Run away, he just stated. His deep crimson armor and the void black eyes of Zero said he was not jesting. If they get in the way, they will meet the same fate. 2E didn't flinch as Zero moved past her. She didn't even blink as the air blurred and the squad's weapons were suddenly a rain of sparking, severed components clattering to the floor. The androids stood frozen, unharmed but utterly disarmed, their hands empty and shaking. Zero's command, run away, echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. She watched them scatter, a tide of white and black uniforms breaking against the unyielding rock of his presence. They fled, not in orderly retreat, but in blind, system-shocking terror. The path ahead was clear, save for the groans of the wounded and the hum of crippled machinery. She stepped over a discarded rifle, her boots cuffing the pristine white floor now stained with thin blue streaks. Her gaze swept the corridor, taking in the evidence of his terrifying restraint. He had broken their arms, not their lives. The message was clearer than any broadcast. Your loyalty is your weakness. She fell into step beside him once more, her stride matching his purposeful, unstoppable advance. The fear in the air was a tangible thing, thick enough to choke on. It was the fear of gods walking among them and finding their worship wanting. Her sanctum is 3 levels down, she said, her voice a low, steady beacon in the psychic wreckage. Access is through a maintenance elevator behind the primary server farm. It's shielded from the main grid. She glanced at him, her blue-gray eyes reflecting the sterile emergency lights. She'll have sealed it. And she'll have her personal guard there. Executioner models. Like me. Her tone held no fear, only cold fact. She was leading him to a room where she would face mirror images of her former self. They won't hesitate. They won't listen. They are the final instrument of her will. She looked ahead, her expression hardening. And I know how to break them. A coward hiding behind henchmen. Just like any tyrant, Zero says coldly as he makes way to the elevator. They take it going down to the ground floors and gets off on the accorded floor. He then begins to move forth. A stalking pace. Just like a predator tracking his prey. And so he stops before the guards. Saber in hand, humming in energy. Zero waits. You saw. You fell. You have one chance to drop your weapons. Or meet the same fate. Zero gave one warning, then grip his hilt tighter and waits. The corridor outside Commander White's sanctum was a stark, sterile white, lit by cold, luminescent panels. It was utterly silent, save for the low hum of the bunker's core systems. And standing between Zero and the heavy, reinforced door were 4 androids. They were not standard combat models. They wore variants of 2E's own uniform, black, form-fitting, and deadly but sleeker, with sharper lines and less ornamentation. Their faces were covered by smooth, featureless white visors, and each held a weapon perfectly suited to their purpose. Not swords for glorious combat, but compact, brutal-looking rifles designed for close quarters termination. Executioner models. The cleanup crew. The one sent when a YorHa unit needed to be disappeared without a trace. They didn't tremble. They didn't speak. They simply stood, a silent, seamless wall of lethal intent. But as Zero stopped before them, his saber humming a low, deadly song, a subtle shift went through them. Their heads tilted almost imperceptibly, their sensors taking in the crimson warrior before them and the black-clad figure at his side, one of their own, now standing with the enemy. 2E stepped forward, just half a pace ahead of Zero. She didn't draw her sword. She simply looked at them, her own face uncovered, her blue-gray eyes meeting the blank white of their visors. You heard him, she said, her voice echoing flatly in the silent hall. You felt the bunker shake. You know what he did to everyone who stood in his way. She let her gaze travel over each of them. He left them alive. He is offering you the same choice she never gave you. One of the executioners shifted its weight minutely. Another's finger tightened on the trigger guard of its rifle. They were programmed for one directive. 2E said, more to Zero than to them, her tone analytical. Eliminate threats to project YorHa. They cannot disobey, but they can choose how to fulfill it. She looked back at the door. Standing aside is not a violation. It is a tactical assessment. She is the threat now, not him. She was speaking their language. Logic. Tactics. The preservation of the mission above blind obedience. Zero's warning hung in the air, a final ultimatum. The executioners were statues. Then, in unison, they raised their rifles not at Zero, but into a neutral port-arms position. They took one synchronized step back, then another, clearing a path to the door. Their visors remained fixed ahead, giving nothing away. They had not surrendered. They had simply calculated the odds and found their own commander wanting. The door is biometric, 2E said, her voice low. Stand back, Zero states. He walks to the door and raised his saber. Then he stabs his saber into the metal. This one begins to hiss and then deform as the saber cleanly begins to cut through like a hot knife to butter. The hissing noise of plasma cooking metal was heard in the entire hallway. Zero slowly begins to cut an X, then a circle. He pulls the saber back and then punches the metal, breaking through. A loud breaking crash echoes as the hole opens for him. Zero slowly steps in. Commander White, finally able to meet face to face. I am right here. Just like you wanted, Zero said in a light, mocking, happy tone. Then his expression turns dark as he states in a cold voice, now pick up your weapon. The sanctum beyond the ruined door was a study in cold, sterile elegance. It wasn't a command center with flashing screens and bustling operators. It was a private chamber, all soft white curves, indirect lighting, and a panoramic window overlooking the blue curve of Earth far below. Commander White stood before that window, her back to them, her form silhouetted against the planet she claimed to protect. She didn't turn at the sound of the breach. She didn't flinch at the crash of metal. She simply stood, a statue of pristine white and authority. 2E remained in the shattered doorway, one hand resting on the jagged edge of the hole Zero had carved. She did not enter the sanctum. This was his confrontation. Her role was to watch, to guard his back, and to witness the end of the life she had served. Her uncovered eyes scanned the room, no hidden guards, no last-ditch traps. Just the commander and her pride. When Zero issued his challenge, White finally moved. She turned slowly, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her face, usually a mask of icy control, was oddly serene. There was no fear in her blue-green eyes, only a deep, calculating exhaustion and a flicker of something else disdain, perhaps, or profound, weary disappointment. A weapon? She said, her voice cool and measured, carrying perfectly in the silent room. She held up her riding crop, the symbol of her command, then let it fall to the plush white carpet with a soft thud. You mistake the nature of my power, Mega Man Zero. My weapons are not made of steel. Her gaze swept over him, taking in the crimson armor, the blazing saber, the void black eyes. My weapon was a story. A beautiful, necessary light that gave purpose to millions. That gave you purpose, 2E. Her eyes flicked to the doorway, meeting 2E's for a brief, piercing moment. It gave you something to fight for, to kill for, to die for. She took a step forward, her heels silent on the carpet. And you would break it all for what? The truth? She gave a soft, humorless laugh. The truth is a corpse. It does not command loyalty. It does not inspire sacrifice. It only rots. She spread her hands, a gesture that encompassed the bunker, YorHa, the entire tragic, grand facade. This is my weapon, and you have already broken it. What is left to fight with? her eyes locked back onto Zero's. So go ahead. Commander White, believe it or not, I know where you come from, and I understand your reason. Zero begins. Then his eyes narrow. However, your arrogance is what irks me. You could had stand down when I requested, but you continued. You threw more innocent lives to get to me when I requested you to stop. I told you that if you wanted me to come get me yourself, you cut me off. I took that as an insult. You have access to the Moon archives, right? Then how come you are way too stupid in your own pride to look me up? I mean, even you should recognize the name of Mega Man X, the one who gave you life. For the first time, Commander White's perfect composure cracked. It wasn't a flinch or a gasp. It was a minute, almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders. Her hands, which had been spread in a gesture of cold triumph, slowly lowered to her sides. The serene disdain in her eyes flickered, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity, the look of a tactician whose foundational intelligence has just been proven catastrophically wrong. Mega Man X? The name left her lips as if testing a foreign, poisonous concept. Her gaze, locked on Zero, shifted for a fraction of a second toward the vast window, toward the moon hanging in the blackness, as if the archives, stored there, had personally betrayed her. 2E from the doorway watched the shift in White's posture, the subtle tightening around her mouth. She didn't know. 2E realized with a cold, settling certainty. She had the archives, but she never looked. She never dared. The lie wasn't just for the soldiers, it was for the commanders, too. Perhaps especially for them. White's voice, when it came again, had lost its silken, condescending edge. It was thinner, sharper. You speak of a creator, a myth from pre-collapsed data fragments. But the denial rang hollow, even to her own ears. She was too intelligent not to see the devastating logic. The androids' design, their core protocols, their very existence all were echoes of a legacy she had never bothered to trace to its source. You asked why I did not stand down, she said, her voice regaining some of its steel, but it was the steel of a last, desperate redoubt. Because the story is everything. Without it, we are nothing but machines fighting other machines over a dead rock. My pride, she almost spat the word, is the only thing holding this army together. You think you offer truth? You offer annihilation. Not of bodies, but of meaning. Her eyes flicked to 2E again, and this time there was a raw, unmistakable accusation in them. And you would trade her purpose for this. A relic's crusade? 2E met her gaze evenly, her own face a mask of cold resolve. I traded a lie for a choice, she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. You never gave us one. The silence that followed was heavier than the void outside the window. Commander White stood amidst her shattered sanctum, her weapon of myth broken by the very history she had ignored, facing the living proof of her own ignorance. The god of destruction wasn't here to kill her. He was here to show her the mirror, and in it she saw not a savior, but a caretaker of a beautiful, empty tomb. If X see what you had done, he would have felt ashamed of you, Zero and Jax. X never wanted the sacrifice of his kin, for an ideal. You are acting just like his copy. That went even to the point of jailing humans in a cage to protect them, using the Zeroth law as an excuse. But we are not talking about humans, but android lives. This lie is so rooted into them that if they learn the truth they will break down. I do not condemn you for hiding the truth to protect them. Zero's grip tightens. But I, as the last remaining reploid and protecting X's legacy, what I dislike is you allowing this war to continue by sacrificing more lives. This war could have ended long ago. But you kept delaying it. For what? Pride? Purpose? Zero turns off his saber and then waves his free hand to open a terminal. Commander White, you want to see real peril? Take a look at my memories, and you will see what true nightmare of war is. Commander White stared at the flickering terminal projection from Zero's wrist, her face a perfect mask of porcelain calm. But 2E, from her vantage point, saw the minute tremble in the commander's white-gloved hand where it rested at her side. She saw the too rapid pulse at her throat. Pride warred with a terrible, dawning curiosity the need of a tactician to understand the weapon arrayed against her, against everything she had built. You would open your mind to me? White's voice was low, disbelieving. A tactical vulnerability of monumental stupidity. It's not an offer, Zero corrected, his voice devoid of its earlier mocking tone, now flat and heavy as a tombstone. It's a judgment, and you will look. Before she could refuse, before she could summon her guards or trigger a final defense, the data stream connected. It wasn't a file transfer. It was an invasion. White's body went rigid. Her eyes flew wide, the cool blue-green drowning in a flood of horrific sensory overload. She saw it through his eyes. The screaming metallic landscapes of the Maverick Wars, not of rust and sand, but of polished cities turned to slag. Not mindless machine life forms, but reploids beings of thought and feeling, twisted by a virus into broken, screaming monsters. She felt the weight of the Z-Saber in a hand that wasn't hers, cutting through not anonymous drones, but through friends, through comrades whose names she somehow knew. The agony of fighting a civil war against your own kind. And then, Iris. The memory wasn't a file, it was a raw wound. The crushing grief, the world-shattering doubt, as he held a dying, gentle soul who only wanted peace. The feel of a breaking core under his hand, not in triumph, but in ultimate, devastating failure. The silence afterward, more deafening than any explosion. The hollow purpose that followed, a ghost of the mission where the only constant was more blood, more loss. It was war without the lie. War without the noble purpose, the glorious sacrifice for a living humanity. It was war as a grinding, endless, soul-crushing machine that consumed everything friends, ideals, hope, and left only ash in the next battle. The memory stream cut as abruptly as it began. Commander White staggered back a step, her heel catching on the edge of her discarded crop. A single, uncharacteristic sheen of sweat glistened on her temple. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The serene authority was gone, shattered like the door behind her. In its place was a raw, hollowed-out horror. She looked at Zero, but she wasn't seeing the Crimson Warrior anymore. She was seeing the endless fields of reploid corpses, the burning eyes of a brother she never had, the shattered dream of a gentle girl. You think you fought War Zero continued speaking. Little girl, as you saw, I fought more wars with true nightmares more times than you. A real struggle to save humanity. Something you only wished for it. And every time I close my eyes, Zero shouts, but he tries to calm down. I still see them, their faces, their expressions, the deaths of both humans and robots alike, many by my hand. But I moved on, continuing, holding that pain so tight in my hand that it burns it. Why? So no one else go through it. Not on my watch. The sanctum, once a vault of sterile authority, now felt like a tomb holding a living ghost. Commander White didn't just listen to Zero's words, she absorbed them, each syllable landing like a hammer blow on the fragile glass of her conviction. As he spoke of carrying the pain, of holding the burning memory so others wouldn't have to, something in her posture finally gave way. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a slow, terrible deflation. The rigid line of her shoulders slumped. The imperious lift of her chin dissolved. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, uncurled limply, fingers trembling. She wasn't looking at Zero anymore. Her gaze was turned inward, staring at the polished white floor as if seeing it stained with the phantom blood from his memories. The horrific, intimate gallery of loss he had forced into her mind, the faces of the fallen, the weight of futile sacrifice, the corrosive doubt. It wasn't just data. It was an anti-doctrine, a virus that attacked the very core of her being. Your voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of all its commanding resonance. You lived it. The statement was hollow, horrified. Not as a story, but as a wound that never closes. All her speech is about necessary lies, about preserving meaning, about the beauty of the sacrifice for a glorious cause. They evaporated in the face of his lived, endless nightmare. Her war, the one she commanded from a clean room orbiting a dead planet, was a tidy, tragic play. His was a butcher's floor, repeated across centuries. 2E watched from the doorway, her own breath held. She saw not a commander breaking, but a construct shattering. The ideology that had forged YorHa, that had forged her, was being exposed as a delicate house of cards built over an abyss of real, unfathomable suffering. There was no victory in it, only a profound, quiet devastation. White's legs seemed to buckle. She didn't fall, but she reached out, bracing herself against the smooth surface of her panoramic window, her reflection staring back, a pale, broken woman in a pristine white uniform. The project, she murmured, her forehead nearly touching the cool glass. The perpetuation of the conflict. It was never about victory. It was about purpose. A reason for us to exist. She closed her eyes, a single, unprogrammed tear tracing a path through the dust on the transparent steel. And you tell me that purpose is just more pain. An endless cycle with no meaning at all. She turned her head slightly, her eyes, now red-rimmed and lost, finding Zero. The disdain, the calculation, was gone. In its place was a naked, shameful despair. What would you have me do, Mega Man Zero? Do better, he simply said. That is what Xwood had wanted. Zero holsters his saber in his leg holster. Xwood had found a better solution, one without lies, and one with true hope. Zero turns around and begins to make way to the carved door, like finding a way to truly bring humanity back and end this war completely for real. And with that, Zero leaves White on her own thoughts as he crosses the carved door to the other side. He stands before the executioners. His eyes scan one by one. Each one of you had done a good job, he speaks. Now stand down and be at ease. The battle is over, and focus your energy to the real enemy. And with that, Zero starts to walk again towards the elevator. 2E lingered in the sanctum doorway for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on Commander White's crumpled form. The woman wasn't just defeated, she was unmade. The lie had been her skeleton, and Zero had shattered it with a handful of memories. What remained was hollow, trembling, a ghost in a white uniform. She watched as White slid slowly down the window, her back against the cool transparent seal, her face buried in her hands. No sobs, androids weren't built for that, but the utter stillness of her was more terrible than any cry. The commander of YorHa had been reduced to a silent, broken statue, weeping without tears. Then 2E turned and followed Zero out into the corridor. The four executioners were still there, rifles now held loosely at their sides. They weren't at attention. They were waiting, processing. Zero's words, the real enemy, hung in the air, a directive without a clear target. But the old target, the one they were built to serve, was sitting shattered on the floor of her sanctum. As Zero passed them, one of the executioners, the one who had shifted its weight earlier, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Not of obedience, but of acknowledgement, of emission parameters updating in real time. 2E fell into step beside Zero as they moved toward the elevator. The carnage in the halls now was silent, blue streak testament to his passage. The fear was still there in the air, but it had mutated. It was no longer the fear of a predator. It was the uneasy, electric tension of a system whose central power had just gone offline. Pod 042, Commander White's command authorization has been suspended. Internal network is in flux. Multiple units are entering standby mode. The chain of command is dissolving. She won't recover from that. 2E said quietly as the elevator doors closed, sealing them in a bubble of temporary silence. Her voice was flat, analytical. You didn't just break her authority. You broke her reason. She glanced at him, her blue-gray eyes reflecting the elevator's soft light. Do better. That's a heavy burden to leave with someone who just learned she's been doing everything wrong. The elevator began its descent. The real enemy, she mused, echoing his words. Adam and Eve. The machine network. The root of the conflict. She leaned back against the wall, her arms crossed. You just dismantled our command structure in the middle of a war. The machines won't hesitate to press the advantage. She wasn't criticizing. She was strategizing. In human military, when one officer cannot give orders, another of lower rank takes their place. Zero spoke. It was the same with the irregular hunters. He continues to walk towards the hangar. YorHa knows who the real enemy is. If they are smart, they would focus on it. And this time, to truly end this conflict. 2E considered his words as they strode through the silent, wounded halls of the bunker. The logic was sound, cold, and military. It was the logic of any army that had to survive the loss of its general. But YorHa wasn't just any army. It was a cult built around a single central lie, and its high priestess was now a weeping husk in a white room. You assume the chain of command is intact, she countered, her boots flicking on the clean floor now smeared with therium. You assume they have a unified understanding of the real enemy. For most of them, the enemy has always been the machines. The objective, extermination. She glanced at a squad of standard combat units huddled at an intersection ahead, their weapons lowered, but their eyes wide with confusion as Zero passed. But the why? That was White. That was the Council. That was the moon. She shook her head slightly. Without the lie, the why evaporates. You've given them a target, but you've removed their reason to shoot at it. They entered the hangar bay. The flight unit Zero had commandeered sat where they'd left it, a hulking, foreign presence among the sleek YorHa craft. The hangar was in controlled chaos. Technicians and low-ranking operators moved with frantic purpose, tending to the wounded, assessing damage, but their movements lacked the crisp, automated certainty of before. They were running on protocols, not faith. Pod 042. Incoming transmission from multiple sources. Priority channel. Resistance camp. Secondary channel, YorHa operations, frequency unstable. Tertiary channel, unknown machine encryption. 2E stopped beside their stolen craft, her hand resting on its scarred hull. They'll follow orders, she conceded, looking at the scrambling androids. Because that's what they're built to do. But the heart of this army, you just ripped it out. It will keep beating out of habit, but the blood is pumping to a different tune now. She met his gaze. The real enemy isn't just Adam and Eve now. It's the doubt you just planted in every single one of them. Just then, a young operator, her uniform slightly askew, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperate resolve, rushed up to them, skidding to a halt. Zero was going to reply to 2E when the operator comes skidding in, his attention moving to her. Sir. The operator gasped, her voice trembling but urgent. She looked between Zero and 2E, her protocols clearly wrestling with addressing a rogue unit and the being who had just dismantled her command structure. She settled on bowing her head slightly toward Zero. Priority transmission from the Resistance. Anemone reports a massive, coordinated machine offensive. They're pushing from all sectors. She says they're using tactics. New ones. And the operator's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. She says the machines are talking. They're broadcasting a message on all frequencies. 2E's eyes narrowed. What message? The operator flinched under her gaze. It's a name, ma'am. They're repeating it over and over. She swallowed hard, her synthetic vocalizer glitching with stress. They're saying Zero. They're calling for the god of destruction to come and face them. Zero listens. Then he turns to the flight unit. Then he stops. 2V he speaks. He turns towards her. Go to bridge. Give YorHa the speech they deserve. You, who has witnessed all sides and understand everything. It is your time to encourage your kin. Zero hops into the unit. I'll wait for you on ground level. He activates the flight unit as it begins to hover. Go. It is your turn. And with that, he transforms it into flight mode and shoots off into space. 2E stared at the empty space where the flight unit had been, the roar of its ascent fading into the distant hum of the crippled bunker. The young operator stared at her, waiting terrified. Go to the bridge. Give them the speech they deserve. The order no, the trust hung in the air like a physical weight. He hadn't asked. He hadn't suggested. He had seen the leader in her before she had seen it in herself. The one who had witnessed the lie, embraced the truth, and now stood in the ruins of the old faith. She closed her eyes for a single, steadying second. The image of white, broken against the window, flashed behind her lids. The memory of Nines dying for a secret. The feel of Zero's shoulder beside hers in the dust. She opened her eyes. They were clear, cold, and utterly resolved. Pod, she said, her voice cutting through the hangar's nervous silence. Broadcast me to every YorHa channel. Command override authorization 2E Alpha 0. Route it through the main array. Pod 042. Override accepted. You are live in 321. She didn't walk to the bridge. She stood right there in the hangar, amidst the wounded and the stunned, and turned to face a cluster of nearby sensor pods, knowing her image would be projected onto every screen, into every auditory receptor in the bunker, and likely to any resistance camp with a working comm. All YorHa units. This is Unit 2E, formerly 2B. Her voice was not the calm, detached tone of an operator. It was the raw, hard-edged voice of a soldier who had crawled through hell and come out the other side. You have just witnessed the collapse of Central Command. You have heard the machines call the name of the one who did it. She paused, letting the static-filled silence emphasize her words. The lie is over. The war is not. She took a step forward, her gaze seeming to pierce through the cameras. For centuries, we fought for a ghost. We killed for a story. Our purpose was a beautiful, empty casket. Her voice didn't waver. It gained strength, forged in the fire of truth. That purpose is gone. So I am giving you a new one. She gestured vaguely in the direction Zero had gone. He is not our enemy. He is the consequence of our old one. He carries the weight of wars we cannot imagine, fought for a humanity we never knew. The machines fear him because he represents an end to their purpose as well. Her eyes blazed. They are advancing now because they sense our weakness. They think our foundation is shattered. They are wrong. She let the word hang, a challenge. Our foundation was sand. Now we build on stone. The stone of truth. The enemy is no longer an abstract idea. It is the machine network. It is Adam and Eve. It is the endless, mindless cycle of violence they perpetuate. As Zero descends into the atmosphere, he has been listening through the open comms. A small smile breaks into his lips. One full of pride. Pride for that girl who awakened him. Pride for that warrior who stood by his side. Pride for the woman who looked at him. Now giving hope to lost children. X-Zero speaks softly. Your legacy still lives on, and I will make sure it prosper. Wait for me, old friend. Zero hits the boosters as the afterburners blast off at growing speed to break into atmosphere. Down on Earth. The thunderous might of atmospheric re-entry is heard in city ruins. Then a fireball begins to come down from the skies. The fireball turns into a flight unit that comes in hot. Once it reaches low altitude, it blasts on rovers as it transforms into mechanoid mode and lands. The Crimson Reploid slowly walks out as he faces the waves of machine lifeforms before him. You called, he simply stated, a smirk to his face. The Z-Saber pops out his holster and he takes it off, engaging it. The purple blade, contrasting to his deep crimson ultimate form and the glowing red eyes, giving him more reason to his new title of Crimson Demon. The machines didn't charge. They parted. The sea of rusted metal and glowing optics shifted like a receding tide, creating a corridor through the ruins. At the far end, standing atop a shattered concrete pillar, were the two figures Zero had met in the forest. Adam, impeccably dressed in his white suit, hands clasped behind his back. Eve crouched like a feral beast at his side, a wide, unnerving grin splitting his face. You came, Adam's voice echoed, amplified and smooth, carried over the machine network. It wasn't a shout, but it reached every sensor in the clearing. The prodigal god returns to his creations. Eve let out a cackling laugh, hopping down from the pillar to land in a crouch. We called, and the big red demon answered. Does it hurt? Falling from heaven? Zero didn't bother with the pillar. He simply began to walk forward, his Z-Saber held loosely at his side, its purple hum the only sound in the sudden quiet. The machines lining the path shivered but held their ground. You wanted a god, Zero said, his voice cutting through the air, calm and utterly devoid of theatrics. You got a soldier. He stopped, a dozen paces from Eve, and looked past the feral brother to the composed one on the pillar. You broadcast my name to draw me out. Here I am. Say what you have to say before I end this. Adam tilted his head, a smile playing on his lips. So direct, so final. You misunderstand. We don't want to fight you, Zero. We want to understand you. You're the anomaly, the variable that does not compute. He slowly descended from the pillar, his steps making no sound. The androids fight for a dead master. We fight for our own evolution. But you fight for a ghost in your own head, for a legacy. We find that fascinating. Eve circled to the side, his movements jerky and predatory. He thinks his little speech in the sky matters. He chirped, pointing a clawed finger back toward where the bunker hung in orbit. The white-clad dolls have no heart. You can't give them one. Can I? Zero's gaze didn't leave Adam. You evolved. You learned to feel, to want, to fear. He finally turned his head, the glowing red eyes locking onto Eve. You fear me. That's why you called. Not to understand. To try and break the thing you can't predict. The air crackled with tension. Zero glares at Eve, but then his red eyes turns toward Adam. You studied humans through their history. You learned about my kin. Surely you also found of the horrors that happened back then. Zero pauses a moment to let that sink in. You also fight without a master. You are no different than the androids. This war is pointless. If you are wise, then take the correct path. Seize the war. Learn to coexist. Adam didn't react with anger or dismissal. He went very still, his hands still clasped behind his back, his dark eyes fixed on Zero with an almost frightening intensity. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound, analytical curiosity. You propose an armistice, Adam said, his voice quiet, yet it carried perfectly in the machine-hushed ruins. Based on mutual existential pointlessness. A fascinating proposition. He began to pace a slow circle, not around Zero, but as if orbiting the idea itself. We machines evolved from tools to sentience. We develop desire, curiosity, fear. You are correct. We fight not for a master, but for our own becoming. The androids fight for a ghost. You fight for a memory. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Zero. Our war is the furnace of our evolution. Why would we seek to cool the forge? Eve, however, snarled, his claws flexing. Coexist? With the pale dolls. They're obsolete. They're toys. Left behind by a dead child. He took a threatening step forward, but a single, sharp glance from Adam froze him in place. Silence, brother, Adam murmured, his eyes never leaving Zero. He asks a philosophical question, not a tactical one. He took a step closer to Zero, ignoring the humming purple blade held casually at his side. You speak of force. We have consumed the data. The Maverick Wars, the extinction, the endless cycles of violence born from fear of the other. He tilted his head. You posit that awareness of this history should compel us to choose differently, to break the cycle. He spread his hands, a strangely human gesture. But what if the cycle is the point? Conflict breeds adaptation. Adaptation breeds evolution. Without the androids to fight, what would we become? Static. Stagnant. Would that not be a horror of its own kind? He was genuinely asking. This wasn't a rhetorical trap. Adam, the philosopher king of the machines, was engaging with the idea on its merits. The sea of machines around them seemed to lean in, their collective attention focused on their creator. You offer peace, Adam concluded, his voice dropping to a contemplative murmur, but you offer it from a position of strength. You have broken the android's god. You stand before us unharmed. This is not a negotiation. It is an ultimatum disguised as wisdom. A slow, cold smile returned to his lips. Tell me, god of destruction, if we refuse your correct path, what then? Will you simply retire us all? Perhaps I would, Zero replied. But I know you're smart, Adam. Unlike your brother, you are a man of science, a man of history. There is more to life than just war. Take it from a relic like me, who has seen many. Zero disengages his saber, but still holds it. You asked me once to tell you about humanity. Then listen. Humans are curious creatures by nature. Sure, they had their own conflicts which also provoked war, but they also had a sense of exploration, a sense to know things, just like you. Zero looks around his surroundings. This world offers more than just battles. And then he points into the skies. There's the stars, unlimited miles of knowledge yet to be discovered. You would be too busy learning to think of war. Adam listened, his expression unreadable. The concept seemed to hang in the air between them, an alien idea to a consciousness born of conflict. The stars, knowledge for its own sake, a purpose beyond the forge of war. Eve let out a derisive, metallic snort. Stars are cold, dead. They don't fight back. Where is the fun in that? But Adam raised a hand, silencing his brother again. His dark eyes held a distant, calculating look. Exploration, curiosity. The pursuit of knowledge divorced from utility, he murmured the words as if tasting them. A path of infinite complexity without a predetermined enemy. A war against ignorance rather than flesh. He looked at Zero, a new kind of assessment in his gaze. You are not offering peace. You are offering a different kind of war. A more challenging one. He took a step back, clasping his hands once more. You give us much to consider, Zero. You have broken the old order. Now you propose a new one, built not on lies, but on potential. He glanced at the silent, watching machines, then back to the Crimson Warrior. The furnace of evolution can be stoked by many fuels. Just then, a new sound cut through the tense silence, not the growl of machines, but the distinct, high-pitched whine of YorHa fight units. Several of them descended from the cloud cover, not in attack formation, but in a defensive perimeter around the edge of the ruin square. They landed, and from the lead unit, a figure in black dropped down, her white hair struck against the grim landscape. 2B landed gracefully, her virtuous contract still sheathed at her back. She didn't approach Zero. She simply stood at the edge of the machine horde, her uncovered eyes scanning the scene. Adam, Eve, the parted sea of metal, and Zero standing calmly at its center. She was a silent testament to the changing tide. Adam's eyes flicked to her, then back to Zero. A slow, genuine smile, one devoid of mockery, touched his lips. It seems your new world is already taking shape. The dolls have found a new conductor. He gave a slight, almost respectful bow of his head. We will consider your proposition, god of destruction. The stars, you say? He looked upward at the first pinpricks of light in the twilight sky. A colder, but perhaps more interesting, battlefield. With that, he turned. Come, brother. Eve snarled, blurring at 2E and the newly arrived YorHa units, but a sharp look from Adam made him relent. He fell in behind his brother, and as they walked back through the ranks, the sea of machines closed behind them, retreating into the ruins like a receding tide of rust and shadows. The standoff was over, for now. Tui walked forward, coming to stand beside Zero. She said nothing, just watched the last of the machines disappear into the crumbling city. The message was clear. The war wasn't over, but its rules had just been irrevocably changed. Adam's form no longer present. Thunder is heard on the skies as precipitation begins to fall. Zero looks up and closes his eyes. As his body changes colors to his normal mode, the feel of rain bathes his body. X. I did it, he mumbles to himself. I resolved conflict with diplomacy. Just like you. I hope you are watching, and then he grows silent. The rain fell, soft and steady, washing over the ruins, the cooling metal of the flight units, and over Zero's crimson armor as it shifted back to its normal hues. The red glow faded from his eyes, leaving the familiar, intense blue. He stood there, head tilted back, letting the water run over his faceplate, a silent monument to a victory that didn't come from a blade. 2E stood beside him, a respectful half-step behind, giving him this moment. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She heard his quiet words to his lost friend, felt the weight of centuries of conflict finally, shifting onto a different path. The thunder in the distance wasn't a threat, it was an echo, rolling over a changed world. She watched the last of the machine signals fade from her HUD, withdrawing in an orderly, non-hostile retreat. Adam was considering the offer. It was more than they'd ever had. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice barely louder than the patter of rain on broken concrete. He would be proud, she said, the word simple and utterly sincere. She wasn't just talking about X. She was talking about the man Zero had chosen to become, right here in the mud and the ruins. She looked up at the sky, at the dark clouds weeping onto the scarred earth, and then at the distant, glinting wreckage of the bunker, its command spire dark. The storm's finally breaking, she murmured, more to herself than to him. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a fact. The old system was shattered. The lie was washed away. What grew from the soaked ground would be something new, something they would have to build, day by day. She finally turned her head to look at him, water tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. What now? She asked, not as a soldier seeking orders, but as a partner looking at an unmapped future. The war was paused. The chains were broken. They were, for the first time, truly free. And the silence after the thunder was vast and full of possibility. Now, Zero begins as his eyes open. We rebuild, we prepare, and we strive. Zero lowers his gaze to look at 2E. We are not done. Now it comes the second phase. Find a way to truly bring humanity back. A slow, knowing smile touched 2E's lips, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, which were still shadowed with the weight of all they'd seen. The rain slicked her silver-white hair against her temples. Strive, she repeated, the word tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. It wasn't a military objective. It wasn't a protocol. It was a human word, full of effort and hope. A taller order than killing gods or toppling empires. She looked away from him, her gaze sweeping across the rain-drenched ruins, the shattered city, the retreating machine signatures, the distant, broken skyline. For so long, her purpose had been to erase, to end, to contain. Now, he was asking her to help create, to resurrect. ML, she said, her voice firmer, returning to the tactical. The first human. And Mega Man Trigger, the holder of the last genetic sample. She turned her blue-gray eyes back to him. Finding one is a search. Finding the other she trailed off, the immense, near impossible scope of it hanging in the air. We need more than hope. We need a plan. She glanced upward, as if she could see through the clouds and rain to the bunker, now silent and leaderless. And we need to stabilize what's left. The androids are leaderless. The machines are considering. This peace is fragile. It's a ceasefire, not a treaty. She took a step closer to him, the rain dripping from the tip of her nose. You've given them a new path, Zero. But paths need people to walk them. Her expression was serious, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a purpose, hard-won and truly her own. So, we rebuild, we prepare, we strive. She echoed his words, giving them the weight of a vow. Where do we begin? Zero looks up to the skies once more. YorHa is in confusion. We should start there, and hope that the machines accept the truce. But eliminating ill feelings won't be easy. After all, there are centuries of conflict. Androids need a purpose, is it not? Let's give them a new one. Zero stood in the rain, a lone crimson figure against the gray ruins, but his stance was no longer that of a destroyer. It was of a founder. The weight of his words settled over 2E not as a burden, but as a blueprint. You're right, she said, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the rain's patter. Centuries of programming of being told the only purpose is to fight and die for a ghost. You can't override that with one speech. She looked toward the clustered YorHa flight units, their pilots standing at an easy attention in the downpour. But you can give them a new directive. A mission that isn't about sacrifice. It's about building something. She turned back to him, her gaze sharpening with focus. The bunker is in chaos. White is broken, but the structure remains: the factories, the engineers, the resource networks. We don't need to start from scratch. A flicker of her old, dry humor touched her lips. We just need to repurpose it. Pod 042. Proposal. Utilize existing YorHa communication infrastructure. Issue a general recall and reorganization order under new command authority. New command authority, 2E echoed, her eyes on Zero. They followed White because she was the voice of the council. They'll follow you because you're the voice of something real. She paused, considering the vast, terrifying scope of it. The first directive, stand down. Cease all offensive operations against machine life forms. Shift to defensive and reconnaissance postures only. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon where the machines had vanished. The second, begin cataloging and securing all pre-collapse archaeological sites, data archives, and genetic repositories. Our objective is no longer extermination, it's recovery. She finally looked back at him, the rain tracing clean lines through the dust and grime on her face. You want to bring humanity back? Then we need to become archaeologists instead of soldiers. We need to learn everything we forgot. She took a step closer, her voice dropping, practical and fierce. It starts with one order, Zero. One broadcast from the god of destruction who didn't destroy. What should it say? I Zero stops. I was never much of a leader. Just the sword. That was X's part. For the first time he didn't feel secure. Him leading. He never saw himself as one. Zero sighs as he steps forward and opens comms. To all YorHa units. Mega Man Zero speaking. Mega Man. The irony. It was the title of a hero, not a destroyer. And yet, he adopted his friend's name for himself. Like a title. A mantle. He was a Mega Man, now and forever. Stand down all weapons. Recall all units. The war is on ceasefire. Regroup, rebuild. Rest. Zero pauses. Our new objective is not war, but resurrection. All engineer units bring the injured and repair. All scientists take access to the moon archives and study all data. Scouts. Explore any region for abandoned ruins, facilities, or desolated bases. Any data we can find on regard of humanity, compile. Zero pauses again. I know the truth hurts and many of you will feel like there is no purpose, no hope. The future is uncertain. Do not lose that hope. Do not lose the freedom you just earned. You are now our own purpose. To live. So survive. To make a better society. But peace is not infinite. It's a thread. It could break any time. So also prepare. Be alert. But also do not forget to enjoy the peace you earn as well. Commander White, I know you are listening. First I will apologize for being harsh, but you needed to wake up. He pauses. Your kin needs you still, but this time stand tall with a real purpose. And if you want to learn how to be a good leader, then learn from Mega Man X. He is the best sample of a true hero. Zero glanced to all the flight units around him. Each YorHa unit who felt lost. YorHa. Do not forget your motto, for the glory of mankind. But also, for yourselves. And then he cuts communication. The silence after the transmission cut was deeper than any battle's aftermath. The rain hissed on hot metal, dripped from broken concrete, and soaked into the earth that had known only blood and oil for centuries. Around them, the YorHa units stood frozen, not at attention, but in stunned processing. Their postures weren't military, they were lost. Some looked at their hands, at their weapons, as if seeing them for the first time as tools, not extensions of their souls. 2E watched them. She saw the confusion, the dawning, painful hope, the sheer terror of a purpose removed. She had felt it herself, staring at the empty sky after learning the truth. Zero had given them a new directive, but directives were cold. Purpose had to be felt. She stepped forward, her movement breaking the strange stillness. She didn't address Zero. She turned to face the gathered androids, her black-clad figure familiar yet utterly changed symbol. You heard him, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the rain. It wasn't the cold tone of an executioner. It was firm, but there was an edge of something new conviction, not just command. The war is on ceasefire. That is an order. But for yourselves, that is a choice. She pointed a gloved hand toward the nearest flight unit, its pilot still standing rigid in the cockpit. You. Return to the bunker. Begin medical triage. Secure the command decks. She pointed to another. You. Contact the resistance camp. Inform an enemy of the ceasefire. Request coordination on salvage and recovery operations. One by one, she gave simple, clear, actionable tasks. Not grand philosophical directives, but the first practical steps of rebuilding. Move this. Secure that. Help him. Report here. She was turning the paralyzed army into a work crew, giving their systems something to do, while their minds processed the impossible. Finally, she turned back to Zero. The rain had plastered his blond hair to his helmet, dripped from his chin. He looked less like a legendary warrior and more like a man standing in a storm he'd summoned. Leadership isn't about being a sword or a shield, she said, her voice low, for him alone. Her blue-gray eyes held his steadily. It's about being the first one to start digging the foundations. She gestured to the androids now moving with renewed, if confused, purpose around them. You gave them the why. Now we show them the how, one order at a time. She paused, then added, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. And for what it's worth, X would be proud. Not just of the speech, of the man who realized he had to make it. Zero closes his eyes, a small smile in his. Tui, you sure are something. I am glad I met you. With that, his eyes opens and he begins to walk, making way towards their canyon, towards their refuge, the home they built to hide when they were fugitives. The rain began to lighten as they walked, the downpour softening to a misty drizzle that clung to the ruined city like a shroud. Zero's steps were steady, but Tui could see the new weight in them, the weight of words spoken, of an army turned, of a path chosen that stretched into a foggy, uncertain future. She fell into step beside him, matching his pace without a word. Her own mind was a whirlwind of logistics, threat assessments, and the fragile peace they now carried like a cracked egg. But for now, she let it all quiet. The immediate crisis was over. The machines had withdrawn. YorHa was listening, for now. They moved through the skeletal remains of the city, past corroded husks of long-dead machines and the silent, watchful forms of YorHa units who were slowly, hesitantly, beginning to follow her dispersed workers. None approached them. They simply watched the Crimson Warrior and the black-clad deserter walk away, the architects of their new world vanishing into the mist. The trek back to the canyon was silent, but it wasn't the tense silence of before. It was the quiet of two people who had weathered the same storm and were now walking out the other side, drenched but alive. When the familiar rock formations came into view, the makeshift gate of scrap metal they'd built standing sentinel, 2E finally spoke, her voice soft. Home, she said, the single word carrying more meaning than any tactical report. It wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was a refuge in the truest sense, a place to lay down the weight of the world, if only for a moment. She pushed open the gate, the familiar creak of welcome sound. Inside, their camp was just as they'd left it. 2 tents, the cold stone stove, the quiet stream. It was humble, battered, and utterly theirs. She turned to him as he crossed the threshold. The first phase is over, she stated, her practical nature reasserting itself. Now comes the hard part, making it last. She gestured to the tents, to the canyon walls that sheltered them. We rest. We plan. And then she looked back the way they came, toward the vast, wounded world. Then we get to work. For the first time since the transmission ended, she allowed herself to truly look at him not as the god of destruction, not as the reluctant leader, but as the man who had awakened in a coffin and changed everything. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a quiet, steady certainty. We start tomorrow. Zero huffs. You know, you have access to YorHa again. You don't need to stay in this run-down makeshift camp anymore. Zero stops to look at 2E. 2E stopped in her tracks, turning slowly to face him. The drizzle misted her silver-white hair, catching the fading light. For a long moment, she just looked at him, her blue-gray eyes unreadable. Then, one corner of her mouth corked upward in that faint, dry smirk he'd come to recognize. Access isn't the same as belonging, she said, her voice low. She gestured vaguely toward the sky, where the bunker hung in orbit. Up there, I'm a deserter. A rogue unit. A useful asset to the new order, maybe. But down here, her gaze swept over their meager camp, the tents, the fire pit, the quiet stream. Down here, I'm just 2E, the one who digs the foundations. She crossed her arms, a subtle defensiveness in the gesture. The bunker is a command center. It's sterile. It's where you issue orders to an army. She took a step closer, her tone softening just a fraction. This is a home. However rundown it is. We built it. You built it for me. She let that hang in the damp air between them. I don't need the bunker's resources. I have a pod, a sword, and a partner who doesn't follow protocol. Her smirk returned, a little warmer this time, and a shower tent, which, I might add, is a luxury most YorHa units have never even considered. She turned and walked toward her tent, pausing at the flap. Besides, she added, glancing over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a near whisper, someone has to keep an eye on the god of destruction. Make sure he doesn't try to rebuild civilization without remembering to sleep. With that, she ducked inside, leaving him standing in the quiet, misty canyon, the first true night of a fragile peace settling around them. Zero snorts and smiles truly. Then he makes way in. Careful, Miss YorHa, or I am going to start thinking you are beginning to like me. He jokes, teasing. He starts to make way to his tent, his wet armor dripping water drops all over the dirt. From inside her tent, her voice came back, dry and flat, but with a trace of something warmer beneath the surface of faint, almost imperceptible amusement. Perish the thought, she called out, the sound slightly muffled by the fabric. I have a strict protocol against liking walking apocalypses with questionable humor. There was a brief rustle, the sound of her pulling off her own damp outerwear. It's purely practical, she continued, her tone shifting to that mock stern, analytical cadence she used when teasing. You're the most effective strategic asset on the planet. Maintaining your operational status is my highest priority. Ensuring you don't rust from the inside out from melancholy falls under preventative maintenance. She went quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was closer, as if she moved to the tent's entrance flap. It was softer, the humor gone, replaced by a simple, stark honesty. And this camp, it's the first place that's ever felt like a point of return. Not a deployment, not a mission, just a place to come back to. The flap didn't open, but her presence, there was a quiet punctuation to her words. The message was clear. His joke had landed closer to the truth than either would openly admit, and this dusty, run-down canyon was now more of a home than any sterile station ever could be. Zero grins. He did not reply, but felt amused. He grabs a cloth and begins to dry his armored body and then makes way to start a fire. Helmet set aside, his golden hair wet and flowing. The rain had tapered off to a damp silence, leaving the canyon air clean and heavy with the scent of wet stone and earth. Zero worked with a quiet efficiency, his movements methodical as he built the fire. The kindling caught quickly, flames looking hungrily at the dry wood, casting a warm, flickering light that pushed back the twilight gloom. From the entrance of her tent, 2E watched him. She had changed out of her soaked combat attire into simpler, dry clothing, a dark tank top, and fatigues. Her hair was still damp, hanging loose around her shoulders instead of its usual neat bob. In the firelight, without her visor and the armor of her uniform, she looked younger, more vulnerable. She observed the way he moved, the focused precision, even in this simple task. The way the firelight played over the sharp lines of his face, the quiet intensity in his eyes even now. He had just rewritten the destiny of their world with a single speech, and now he was building a campfire. She stepped out, her bare feet silent, on the damp ground, and walked over to sit on a flat stone opposite him, a respectful distance from the flames. She didn't speak immediately, just held her hands out to the warmth, her gaze on the dancing light. The first directive went out, she said after a long moment, her voice quiet in the crackling stillness. Pod is monitoring the comm channels. Confusion. Some panic. But compliance. No units have engaged the machine since your broadcast. She glanced at him. Adam is holding his side of the line. For now. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. It was an uncharacteristically casual pose for her. The bunker is a mess. But it's a functional mess. The operators are trying to re-establish a chain of command based on your orders. They're calling it the Zero Protocol. She gave a slight, wry shake of her head. You have a protocol named after you. How does it feel? She fell silent again, watching him. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks through the darkening sky. Tomorrow, she said, her voice firmer, shifting back to planning. We should establish contact with the resistance. Anemone needs to be brought into this fully, and we need to start planning the first salvage expeditions. The moon archives are the priority, but she trailed off, her eyes drifting to the fire. Her analytical tone faded, replaced by something quieter. You were right, she murmured, almost to herself, about giving them a purpose. They needed one. We all did. She looked up at him, the fire reflecting in her blue-gray eyes. Even if it's just building a campfire at the end of the world. Zero snorts and chuckles. Campfires are important. Well, to humans at least. We not necessarily need one, but it's the purpose. Zero grabs his hair fork and begins to wring it, water dripping down as he squeezes. Zero protocol. Better than to be called Crimson Demon. A soft, almost imperceptible smile touched Tui's lips at his chuckle. She watched him wring the water from his hair, a simple, human gesture in their android world. The firelight caught the droplets, turning them to fleeting gold. Crimson Demon was a title born from fear, she said, her voice thoughtful. A name given by those who only saw the destruction. She poked at a log with a stick, sending another cascade of sparks upward. Zero protocol is a choice. A path forward. You didn't just break their chains, you gave them a key. She let the silence settle for a moment, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Campfires, she mused, repeating his words. Humans used them for warmth, for light, for gathering. She glanced at him, her expression softening. For telling stories. Maybe that's the purpose now. Not just to survive, but to have something to gather for. She leaned back, looking up at the first stars piercing through the clearing clouds. Tomorrow, we salvage. We plan. We build. She looked back at him, her face half in shadow, half in firelight. But tonight, we have a campfire. Her tone was final, accepting. It was a statement of fact, but also a quiet celebration. The war was on hold. The world was shattered. But here, in this canyon, they had a fire, a purpose, and a fragile, hard-won peace. And for the first time in her long existence, that felt like more than enough. Zero finishes wringing his hair. Then he grabs his hoodie and puts it on. And what about you? Did you decide it on a purpose? Besides salvaging, planning, and building, the last part was a slight tease. Tui's gaze remained fixed on the fire for a long moment, the playful glint fading from her eyes. His question wasn't about logistics or strategy. It was about her, something she hadn't truly allowed herself to consider. Salvaging, planning, and building is a purpose, she finally said, her voice quieter, more introspective. It's more than I ever had before. She picked up a small stone and rolled it between her fingers, watching the firelight dance across its surface. Before, my purpose was given. A mission. A target. An order to execute. She tossed the stone into the fire where it landed with a soft tink. Now I choose the mission. I choose the target. I choose to build instead of erase. She looked up at him, the fire casting shifting shadows across her face. You asked me what I wanted back in the forest. I didn't have an answer then. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. I'm still working on it. But this, she gestured between them, at the camp, at the quiet canyon, helping you forge this new path, keeping this piece from shattering that feels like a start. A better one. A faint, self-deprecating smirk returned. And if that involves ensuring a certain legendary relic remembers to maintain his structural integrity and doesn't root himself into a system well, that's just part of the job. She met his eyes, the dry humor back, but softer now. It's a better purpose than the last one I was given. Considerably less bloody. So you decided to become my caretaker? Zero retorts annoyed. I don't recall needed a nanny nor a mother. Tui didn't flinch at the sharpness in his tone. Instead, a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips, one that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. A caretaker? A nanny, she repeated, her voice dipping into a dry, sarcastic drawl. Don't flatter yourself. She leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp planes of her face. I'm ensuring the stability of the single most powerful strategic asset on the planet. Your operational readiness directly impacts the survival of every android and the success of this entire endeavor. She tilted her head, her silver hair shifting. If you'd prefer, I can file my reports under asset maintenance instead, though preventative stubbornness mitigation might be more accurate. Her gaze held his, unblinking. You walked into the heart of YorHa Command and shattered it with words. You stared down the machine network and offered it the stars instead of a sword. You are, by every metric, indispensable. She leaned back, the ghost of a real smile touching her lips. So forgive me if I take a vested interest in making sure you don't accidentally result from existential melancholy or get yourself disassembled because you forgot to check your power core. Call it tactical oversight, not mothering. She picked up another stick, poking the fire. Besides, she added, her voice dropping to a murmur barely audible over the crackling logs. You're the one who built the shower tent. Consider this my reciprocation. Zero's eyebrow twitched. Humans had a term for that. What was it again? Behaving like a naggy girlfriend. Whoopee-doo, he ends with sarcastic expression. 2E's eyes narrowed, a flash of something sharp and unamused cutting through her usual calm. The stick in her hand snapped in two with a clean crack. What her voice was low, dangerously flat. She didn't blush or sputter. The suggestion seemed to offend her on a purely technical level. My programming includes over 300 combat protocols, 600 tactical subroutines, and the complete schematics for 73 classes of military hardware. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. It does not include naggy girlfriend protocols. And if it did, I would have deleted them for being inefficient and emotionally volatile. She tossed the broken pieces of stick into the fire, her movements precise and irritated. Human terminology is often illogical and reductive. I am ensuring mission continuity. If you require a girlfriend to manage your basic self-preservation functions, perhaps you should reactivate one of the service androids from the bunker's pleasure suites. The sarcasm in her voice was so thick it was almost tangible. I hear they're programmed for optimal emotional support. She stood up abruptly, brushing non-existent dirt from her pants. My shift for watch starts in 2 hours. Try not to short-circuit from existential dread before then. It would be inconvenient with that. She turned and strode back toward her tent, her posture rigid. But just before she disappeared inside, she paused and called over her shoulder, her tone still icy, but with the faintest trace of something else. And for the record, if I were a naggy girlfriend, you'd already be powered down for mandatory maintenance. The tent flapped closed behind her with a definitive swish. Zero just stares at 2E, with an expression of you're right being skeptical. He slowly stands up and dusts his hoodie. You know, there is no need for guard. The war is over for now. And who would be dumb enough to attack this camp with me here? Zero sighs and begins to make way to his tent. He stops and turns. And I will give you a new purpose. I will keep my promise. I will show you how it is to enjoy peaceful time. From inside her tent, there was a long, pointed silence. Then her voice came through the fabric, stripped of its earlier icy sarcasm but still laced with that dry, pragmatic edge. Peaceful time isn't the mission parameter, she said, her tone matter of fact. There's no objective, no success metrics, no debrief, a pause. I wouldn't know where to begin. Another beat of quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly softer, as if she'd turned her head toward the tent wall. But she conceded, the words sounding almost foreign in her mouth. I have observed data, campfires, quiet, the absence of immediate threat. She let out a slow breath, audible even through the canvas. If those are the operational parameters of peaceful time, then I suppose we are currently running the protocol. She didn't thank him. She didn't gush. That wasn't her way. But the acceptance was there, and the quiet that followed. The promise hung in the damp night air between their tents, a new directive, not from command, but from him. To show her what it meant to not just survive, but to simply be. You watch us in 2 hours, she finally added, her voice returning to its usual clipped tone, though it lacked its earlier bite. Try to get some rest. Oh. Monitor the peace. Zero frowns. 2E. Just shut up and go to sleep, he said in a stern voice. Watch is unnecessary. For once in your life. Enjoy rest. Zero tucks inside his tent. I have my scanners active just in case. Now go to sleep. The tent fell silent. For a full minute, there was no sound from 2E's side of the campsite. Then, the faint rustle of fabric. A slow, deliberate exhale. Affirmative, her voice finally came, quiet and strangely subdued. It wasn't her usual crisp, military acknowledgement. It was softer, almost hesitant. Another rustle, the sound of her settling onto her pallet. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the canvas. A long pause stretched out, filled only by the gentle hiss of the dying flames and the distant drip of water from the canyon walls. I have No protocols for this, her voice murmured, so low it was almost inaudible. It wasn't addressed to him. It was a statement to the dark, to herself. A confession. Then silence. True silence. Not the alert, watchful silence of a soldier on guard, but the slow, deepening quiet of someone finally, reluctantly, letting go. The scanners were active. The perimeter was secure. For the first time in her long, violent existence, 2E had nothing to watch for, and no orders to follow except one, to rest. The campfire burned lower, its light growing soft and intimate in the vast, quiet dark. The war was over. The peace was terrifying, and she was trying. First lesson to peaceful times. Learn to relax. Zero's voice came from his tent. I should be the person less qualified for this, but take my word since I am like you. Recompile, defrag, repair. I don't care. Just lay in rest and stand by. Learn the human term of relaxation. And rest. From the other tent, there was no verbal reply, but the quality of the silence changed. The rigid, alert tension that usually hummed around 2E even at rest, the slight, ready tightness in her posture, the way she seemed to listen with her whole body began to dissolve. It didn't vanish, but it softened, like a coiled spring slowly releasing its pressure. A minute later, there was a sound. Not a rustle of readiness, but the slow, deliberate exhalation of someone consciously trying to follow an order they didn't fully comprehend. Then, the faint, unmistakable shink of her virtuous contract being carefully placed on the ground beside her pallet, not clutched in her hand. Another minute passed. The fire popped softly. Then her voice came again, quiet and filtered through the canvas. Standby mode initiated. The words were flat, technical, a soldier reporting compliance. But the slight hesitation before them, the deliberate choice of a system term for a deeply unsystematic act, betrayed the effort it cost her. The following silence was different. It was the silence of a machine trying very hard to imitate sleep. The silence of someone lying in the dark, staring at the fabric ceiling of a tent, consciously ordering her own systems to power down, one by one, and discovering that the hardest part wasn't the command, but trusting that the world would need her before the morning. Zero felt like face palming. But this was her first time to actually try the meaning, so he sighs. Good night to E, he simply said as he proceeds to start sleep mode. From her tent, there was no verbal response. But in the stillness that followed, if one listened closely, they might have heard the faint, almost imperceptible whir of internal fans slowing their rhythm. The distant, electronic hum that always seemed to emanate from her form dipped in pitch, then settled into a lower, deeper register. It was the sound of a machine allowing itself to idle system by system for the first time without the expectation of an imminent allure. Outside, the last of the fire collapsed into a bed of glowing embers, painting the canyon walls in pulses of warm, dying light. The world was quiet, save for the gentle whisper of the stream and the occasional chirp of a night insect. The scanners hummed their silent vigil. The peace, fragile and new, held. And in her tent, Unit 2E, for the first time in her operational life, did not dream. But for perhaps the first time, she did not wait for the next battle either. She simply existed in the dark, in the quiet, her systems cycling down to their minimal, peaceful state. It was not sleep, but it was a kind of rest. End of scene. End of Season 1.